Want a podcast? Kia ora, I'm Maxine, podcast producer, audio nerd, and founder of Maxine London Creative. Let's explore what it takes to start and maintain a successful podcast. I'll chat with industry experts, podcast hosts, and fellow audio nerds on everything about the wonderful world of podcasting. We'll talk techniques, trends, and top tips to get you started on your podcast journey. Whether you're a podcast newbie or you've been here a while, welcome. Want a podcast? I've been seeing in my feeds recently a lot of discussion that comes down to ethical podcasting. There have been some accusations towards some pretty big names in the industry about whether or not they are purposefully spreading misinformation and disinformation, and what role freedom of speech, to what extent, has in podcasting. Now, this is a pretty big topic, but it's an important one. Because whether you like it or not, if you've got a podcast, you are part of the media. And that comes with a certain level of responsibility. So first of all, let's dive into the big picture, the media that we consume. So this is everything that we are taking in on a daily basis, the podcasts, the news, the videos on TikTok, all of this stuff that we consume, that we are being fed by algorithms, shapes the way in which we think, the way that we perceive the world, what we believe, how we interact and engage with people, and how we behave. Now, when information is inaccurate or misleading, it doesn't just affect individuals, it ripples through entire communities. Let's take Belle Gibson, for example. Now, she recently came to the forefront of news again after Netflix released Apple Cider Vinegar, which is a documentary based on Belle Gibson's story. She was an Australian wellness influencer who claimed that she had cured her brain cancer with clean eating and holistic treatments. Her story spread like wildfire. She even landed a book deal and an app before it all came crashing down, because none of it was true. What she was saying, what she was spreading over social media, this was before the time of podcasts really, all of this impacted people on an individual level. People who seriously had cancer, which Belle Gibson did not, were basing their health decisions on what she was saying and spreading, based on a whole huge web of lies. And it impacted people's lives. Now, this is an extreme example, but it really does highlight something that every podcaster, every person that has a platform, really, even if you've got a public social media profile, needs to remember. What we say has power. And with that power, we can help people or we can harm them. Now, I think this is particularly important with podcasting because we build such a great, intimate, one-to-one relationship with our audience. The trust that podcast communities have with their hosts is so high. And if we take advantage of that or abuse that, that can be so damaging. So as creators, it's not just our job to sound good and get big numbers. Our job is to be accurate. That means doing our due diligence, checking the facts, vetting our guests, and asking the questions, is this person qualified to talk on this topic? Could this information be misleading? Because once you hit publish, your words can spread further and faster than you realize. They can directly impact people's decisions, the way that people think, the way that they interact with others. Now, I don't want to say this to scare you because I know that fear can hold a lot of people back from sharing their stories, and that is not what this is about at all. We are all human. We are bound to make mistakes. If you do get something wrong, the best thing you can do is own it. Transparency, honesty, and correction build trust. And trust is everything in podcasting. Your listeners don't expect perfection, but they do expect integrity. Now, throughout this podcast, we're going to talk about a few different things. We're going to talk about defamation, the Advertising Standards Authority, and the Broadcasting Standards Authority. Now, this is based on the regulations that we have here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So if you are abroad or overseas, it's best to check your own standards and your own regulatory guides because they will differ slightly. But this will be a broad understanding that you can take with you. But if you are in New Zealand, buckle up because this is what you need to know. Let's start off with defamation. Now, a defamatory statement brings a person into disrepute who may then sue you and or your media employer. So yeah, best to avoid these. Defamation is expensive and it can be used as a legal weapon. Once someone has been sued for defamation, they are no longer allowed to talk about this topic at all. It is actually a good thing though, because what it does is it protects our reputations against unjustifiable attacks. Now, a defamatory statement is a false statement that does one of three things. It lowers the individual in the eyes of the reasonable members of the public. It leads people to ridicule, shun, or despise an individual. It injures a person's personal reputation. Now, the key word here is false. For a statement to be considered defamatory, it has to be false. If it is true, no matter how nasty, it's not defamation. So this is where the rules can get a little bit blurry because what defines a reasonable member of the public? Laws are constantly changing as society evolves and changes, and we're not just swapping facts, we're swapping opinions. Now, here are some things to steer clear of when you're broadcasting and podcasting. Stating or suggesting that someone is guilty of a crime. Stating or suggesting that someone has behaved improperly or has improper tendencies. So if they're dishonest, devious, a liar, a coward, stuff like that. Do not report the name of an alleged, so not yet convicted, rapist. Okay, so stay away from rape, murder, children crimes. Also be careful with guests that you have on your shows saying the names of people because this can also stuff up an ongoing investigation. Suggesting or stating that a person, firm, or company is bankrupt, alleging that someone is unfit for his or her job or is incompetent, describing someone as a scab, stating an amateur sportsman has accepted money for sport, describing an entertainer as past it, making someone a laughing stock, although these lawsuits aren't usually successful, but cartoons and satire can defame if they suggest conduct or traits that cannot be proven true. This one is a little bit of grey area. And defamation against the deceased, because while you can't technically defame the dead, family members can still sue. If you want more information, definitely check out the Broadcast Standards Authority because it has everything you need to know there. And I also am aware that like a lot of this stuff is common sense, but sometimes it's best to just say it because it is really important to keep front of mind. Now, if you do happen to get caught in a defamation case, here's how you can defend yourself. You can argue truth, honest opinion, consent, or settlement. Okay, so truth. This one is very difficult to prove though because your truth must meet the legal standards. It can also backfire with the concept of punitive damages. Honest opinion. This protects reviews or editorials or like letters to the editor. So if you're saying this was my opinion, aka it's not a fact, that's how you can defend yourself here. Consent, but it is best to have consent in writing. Settlement, so you can write an apology. And privilege, in certain circumstances, statements can be protected from defamation actions, and we as broadcasters can enjoy some of that protection as well. So every form of communication can be subject to defamation. Internet defamation can be dangerous, particularly here in New Zealand. You can't always just say what you want on the internet or on your podcast, so be careful. All right, now let's get into the BSA, the Broadcast Standards Authority. Now, the BSA determines complaints about programs on TV, radio, and online, and on-demand content that has previously been broadcast and content that is live streamed by a broadcaster. So while podcasting is a little bit up in the air about the specific standards, who can make a complaint and where they can complain to, it is still a good idea to be very wary of the content you're putting out. For the most part, it's common sense as to what to do and what not to do, but here are the basics that you need to be aware of. So good taste and decency. This may relate to offensive language, sexual material, nudity, violence, or anything else that might cause offense or distress in the context of a program. Privacy. Now, this only applies to identifiable individuals who are featured in the broadcast or directly affected by the broadcast. So key issues include whether an individual has reasonable expectation of privacy, whether private information was disclosed, and whether the disclosure or intrusion was highly offensive. Alcohol. Concerned with whether a broadcast amounted to alcohol promotion, and if so, whether this promotion was socially responsible. Balance. This only applies to news, current affairs, or factual programming which discusses a controversial issue of public importance. Broadcasters must make reasonable efforts to present competing viewpoints about important issues. Accuracy. So again, this only applies to news, current affairs, or factual programmings. But programs should be accurate in relation to material points of facts and should not mislead. Fairness. Now, this only applies to individuals or organizations taking part or referred to in a program or show. So the key issues here include informed consent, informed participation, and reasonable opportunity to comment. All right, now let's dig into the Advertising Standards Authority, or the ASA. So the definition of an advertisement is any message, the content of which is controlled directly or indirectly by an advertiser, expressed in any language and communicated in any medium with the intent to influence the choice, opinion, or behaviour of those to whom it is addressed. So same deal with ASA as it is with BSA, that a lot of this is going to be common knowledge, but it is still just good to cover some of these basics just so you can be aware of them. Truthful presentation. So advertisements must be truthful, balanced, and not misleading. Advertisements should not mislead or be likely to mislead, deceive, or confuse consumers, abuse their trust, exploit their lack of knowledge, or, without justifiable reason, play on fear. So this includes by implication, omission, ambiguity, exaggerated or unrealistic claim, or hyperbole. Socially responsible. Advertisements must be prepared and placed with a due sense of social responsibility to consumers and society. Alcohol advertising. So alcohol advertisements and promotions need to be consistent with the need for responsibility and moderation in alcohol. Alcohol advertising and promotions shall be directed at adult audiences, and they cannot be directed at minors nor have strong, evident appeal to minors in particular. This applies to both content and ad placement. Okay, so we've covered the Advertising Standards Authority, we've covered the Broadcasting Standards Authority. Now this is where it gets interesting for podcasters, because technically most independent podcasts don't fall under the same strict rules as broadcasters like RNZ or TVNZ. But that doesn't mean that we should just go and ignore all of those standards. Why? Because our audiences are listening to us in the same way that they listen to radio or TV, often with more trust. Now, podcasting is such a special medium, and this is the reason that I love podcasting, is you can build such an intimate and deep one-to-one connection directly with your audience. Your audience trust you. They know you. They understand you. And if you break that trust, that can be really, really dangerous. If your show has mature themes or explicit content, it is your responsibility to warn your listeners. The same thing goes for triggering or sensitive material. You need to include a content warning at the top of each episode and at the top of your show notes. This is not just about protecting your audience, but you are showing them that you care about their well-being and trust. All right, now let's talk about a recent headline here in Aotearoa because it is big and it does impact what we do as podcasters. So Winston Peters, the New Zealand First Leader, is accusing the Broadcast Standards Authority of, quote, Soviet-era Stasi censorship following a decision to begin regulating podcasts and online media. So he posted on social media saying that it was blatant overreach by the BSA and highly concerning, and he demanded a full explanation for their recent outrageous action. So the Broadcast Standards Authority has started moving into podcasts, which personally I think is a good thing, and I'll get into this a little bit later. But the Free Speech Union later put out a release about the decision to start regulating podcasters, saying that it was a move far beyond legal mandate. So this is all about a complaint that was sent by the BSA to the platform, which has been published on the online platform's website, outlining concerns raised about allegedly unacceptable racist comments. And this was in the platform's 22nd of July 2025 program. So the whole discussion is about whether or not the platform should be considered a broadcaster. So the Broadcasting Act defines broadcaster as a person who broadcasts program, broadcasting as any transmission of programs, and program as sounds or visual images or a combination of, intending to inform, enlighten, or entertain or promote in the interest of any person or promote any product or service. Based on those definitions, the BSA said that the platform was broadcasting when this complaint happened. So the Free Speech Union has got involved, saying that it is a serious threat to free speech in New Zealand. The chief executive, Julian Heather, said that if the BSA is allowed to extend its reach into podcasts and online media, it will be policing speech it was never designed to regulate. And that kind of mission creep always starts with someone controversial. So today it's Sean Plunkett, and tomorrow it could be anyone who asks the wrong questions. Quote unquote. She also says that the BSA had previously published material implying that freedom of expression itself can cause harm, risking turning regulators into censors, punishing opinions rather than protecting open debate. So the Free Speech Union has actually called on Parliament to make clear the BSA has no authority over podcasts or internet content, and to ensure that any future changes to broadcasting law were debated openly, not smuggled in behind closed doors. So here's the takeaway behind that particular news article. When public figures clash with regulators, it often sparks debate about free speech versus responsibility. But remember, freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom from accountability. The BSA isn't here to silence people, it's there to ensure accuracy, fairness, and decency, the basics of ethical broadcasting. And while podcasting gives us incredible creative freedom, we still need to operate with integrity. So what does ethical podcasting actually look like in day-to-day practice? What it looks like to me is fact-checking before you record, being transparent when you make mistakes, including content warnings when they're needed, vetting your guests for credibility, avoiding sensationalism just for the downloads, being honest about sponsorships and commercial interests, and respecting privacy, even if you're telling a great story. It's not about being boring or beige, it's about being trustworthy. Podcasting is one of the most personal, powerful mediums out there. We build communities, we shape opinions, and we directly influence culture, all through the stories that we tell and the voices that we amplify. So let's do it responsibly. Let's be the kind of creators who people can trust, learn from, and feel safe listening to. Because ethical podcasting isn't about rules and red tape. It's about respect. Respect for your audience, your guests, and the power of your platform. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. I know it's a little bit ranty, but it's something that we all need to be aware of as we are people with influence. We have platforms that can shape the way that communities think and feel. If you like this episode, feel free to flick me a DM on Instagram at wannapodcast. I would love to hear your thoughts, even if it's not the same. If you have different opinions, I'm all ears. Hit me up. If this podcast got you thinking, feel free to share it with another podcaster because we all need to build responsible platforms. Until next time, stay curious, stay creative, and stay honest. Bye. Thanks for listening to Wanna Podcast. If you got something out of this episode, give it some love. Subscribe, follow, share it with your friends, or leave a review. It all helps to get this podcast into the ears of those who need it. If you're keen to connect, check out Wanna Podcast or Maxine London Creative on Instagram, or head to maxineLondonCreative.co.nz. Check out the show notes for links. Thanks again for being part of my community. See you next time.